Okay, I think we'll get started. It looks like our waiting room has slowed down a little bit and everybody's pretty much in the meeting for now. Welcome, everyone. My name is Liz Jackson. I'm the Executive Director of the Indiana Forestry and Woodland Owners Association. Our organization supports Indiana woodland owners in their objectives on their land by providing them resources and information and assistance, giving them a chance to network as well. We're hosting 4 webinars this past winter, and this is the 4th of the series. Those are going to be available on YouTube. We have made recordings of all of them, and I will be sending those out in a follow-up message. Today, we're pleased to have with us Dan Childs. Dan is a retired agronomist from Purdue. He has always had a love of nature, and he loved working in the soil, growing his own food, and observing nature. What started as a hobby for him, like many of us have as a hobby, has turned into the production of 2 books on wildflowers. Each book tells the story of early to late flowering wildflowers and ends with a poem expressing his personal experiences with the project of writing the books. Dan is active with the Indiana Native Plant Society, and they recommended him to us tonight, and we're pleased to welcome him to us, and we're looking forward to hearing what he has to share with us about wildflowers in Indiana. Welcome, Dan. I'll turn it over to you now.
Okay, thank you, Liz. Just make sure you can hear me okay.
We're good.
Okay, great. Yes, so I'm a retired agronomist. I got my degrees at Purdue University, and I went into botany plant pathology as a master's, and became a weed scientist. So throughout my 35-year career, I have been killing plants. And so this hobby I have of mine is more, I guess, an atonement for my sins for killing all these plants over the years. But I'm looking forward to tonight's presentation, and I am a little tired because, as maybe some of you stayed up to watch the game, and I told my friend I was either going to be very happy or very sad, but either way, I'm going to be very tired today. I also work part-time for Prophetstown State Park, which I am the resource manager there. So I do kill plants there. So I get to do some of that stuff. I did that today. Was spot spraying some bush honeysuckle in the campground, but just enjoy being outside. And one of my favorite trails there is Trail 2 this time of year, because we have a plethora of spring ephemerals that are coming up now. So let's get going. We're going to go on a tour today, a walking tour. And what you see on the screen now is, late winter, early spring. This is kind of what the trail would look like. You notice there's no leaves on the trees yet. The sun is soaking into the soil, and soon you will see it come alive with these spring ephemerals, these wildflowers. Ephemeral means short-lived, right? Why are these plants short-lived? They come up, they flower, set seed, and die. And they do this in a short period of time because their large neighbors, the trees, are going to be shading them fairly quickly. So they want to get through their reproductive stages, their life cycle, before the ground becomes totally dark from shade. So we have a good time right now to walk our trails and look at these spring ephemerals, before they go away. But we still have wildflowers in June and July that bloom, and we'll be talking about some of those coming up. So put on some comfortable walking shoes and grab your favorite walking stick and camera, and let's go on a virtual woodland tour. Well, before we start the tour, let's review. So I'm going to be talking about wildflowers, and when I'm doing that, I'm going to bring up certain aspects of the flower and certain terms. So let's just review. I think you probably all know these. On the right side of the screen is the pistil. That's the female part of the flower, and at the top we see the word stigma. So this is the sticky end of the style. The style is kind of a long, narrow tube, and the stigma is where the pollen will land there, and that's where the pollen then germinates and forms a pollen tube that goes down the style into the ovary, and then the gametes then meet with the ovules there in the ovary, and that's where the seed is produced. On the left side of the screen was talk about the male flowers, the male parts. So we collectively call that the stamen, and that's made up of the anthers. That's the little knobs at the end of the long, skinny structure called a filament, and the anthers produce the pollen. Oftentimes the anthers are colored brightly, and that's to attract insects, because obviously that's what they want to do. They want to move their pollen to other flowers. So below the flower parts, then you see the petal, and they're all, petals are often colored again to draw in pollinators and insects. Below the petals, we have the sepal. If you can see my cursor there, the sepal, that oftentimes are green. They kind of look like a modified leaf, but sometimes they look like the petal, and people will, maybe confuse them as the petal. So they can be, be something other than just green. Sometimes the petals and the sepals can be fused together, and we call that a tepal, T-E-P-A-L. And the lily family has some members of that family that have not petals or sepals, but they have tepals. Okay, so we are all set. We got our botany out of the way, and we can start our hike. The first plant, skunk cabbage. Now, why would I start with skunk cabbage? This is the very first, the earliest flowering plant in the woods, is skunk cabbage. It's from the arum family. It's a very unique family. There's other members of this family I'll talk about here in a second. But why skunk cabbage? Well, it has a structure called a spathe. This structure here, this kind of mottled color, it ends in a kind of a pointed, looks like a horn. It's open on one side, and inside the spathe is a structure called the spadix, and it's covered. Let me remove that for you there. It's covered with tiny little flowers. So it looks like a little red ball inside there, or a little red egg, and covered with tiny little flowers. Now, what's interesting, and then this plant is very interesting because it has lots of cool stuff about it, is that it has a process called thermogenesis. And that's where cellular respiration creates heat inside the plant. And so with that heat, it can melt snow, frozen ground, and pop right up through the ground in winter or late winter. And then the spathe comes up. The spadix has the flowers, and so this is the first flowering plant that you'll find in the woods. So very unique in that it can create its own heat. The other thing you notice about this picture is the wetness. So if I go back to the first slide here, skunk cabbage grows in a colony, and some of these colonies can be quite old. The ones that we have at the park are probably decades old. But they require water, water that runs by its roots. So it oxygenates, brings oxygen to the roots. So typically you find skunk cabbage on a seep or a moving stream or some sort of little brook or something where it can get oxygenated water. Okay, so that's skunk cabbage, very unique. One of the other members of that family, the arum family, is jack in the pulpit. And on the right side, you see the spathe, this maroon striped colored structure here. And then you see Jack right here sticking his head out. That's the spadix. And then Jack will be covered with flowers. And then these flowers then develop into these bright red berries over here on the left side of the screen. And I guess people tell me that turkeys are fond of those little berries. So that's one. And there's another plant called the green dragon. You can walk through the woods and maybe not even notice it because it's not very conspicuous. But it's again in the arum family. Here's the spathe, and inside the spathe is this long, narrow, it's also called dragon's tongue. So it's a long, narrow structure, or the spadix is long and narrow, and it's covered with these little yellow flowers there at the base. So arum family, very unique. But these jack-in-the-pulpit and green dragon, they don't you don't see those until later in the summer or late spring. Okay, let's go back to the early flowering ephemerals. One of the first ones that we will see flowering early in the spring or late winter is snow trillium. Snow trillium is first trillium to bloom. It's also the smallest of the trilliums. Now, when we see the word trillium, the first three letters is TRI, correct? Tri stands for three, and trilliums have three sets of three. So let's count them. So over here we have three petals, these white structure, okay? Underneath that is the sepal. So here's one here. If you following my cursor, another one, and another one. So that's three sepals, and then we have three leaves. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. So three sets of three is trillium. Now, snow trillium is very small, as I mentioned. It's about the size of a silver dollar. And if you're in the millennial or younger, you may not know what a silver dollar is. So I'll show you a picture of one. Here's one, and a snow trillium can fit right inside a silver dollar. So very small, but really cute. I love to see the snow trilliums when I'm out walking trails late in the winter. It's a sign of spring that's coming. Okay, other trilliums. Here we have prairie trillium, much bigger. It's got a long stalk. Again, three sets of three leaves, mottled leaves, sepals, and then these maroon colored petals that point upward. Now, I would like for you to look at this plant here where I've got my cursor. You see the sepals point below the leaves, okay? That is a identifiable feature because there's another trillium that looks very similar, and that's called sessile trillium. But in this case, the sepals are above the leaves or point above the leaves, okay? So again, prairie trillium, they point below the leaves, and then sessile, they're sitting right there on top of the leaves. And then sessile trillium is a very short plant. It doesn't have a very long stalk. Okay, so those are those trilliums. We also have white trillium, big, beautiful white petals. And as they age, they turn pink. So kind of a 2-for-1 there. You get white and pink on the same flower. This is called drooping trillium. Another unique trillium. There's the horticulture park not far from Purdue on the east or the western side of the campus has quite a few drooping trilliums in that park, and large leaves. Okay, big leaves here, and they have the stalk that drops below the leaves, and at the end of the stalk then is the flower, and the flower has as trilliums do, three petals, three sepals, and you get the three leaves. But in this case, we have another set of three. And if you look closely, the stigma, remember the stigma, that's the end of the style, that's where the pollen lands, is divided into three parts. So a little closer view of that shows that this it's recurved backwards. So this is the stigma, but it's divided into three. So now we have four sets of three for this unique trillium. All right, trout lilies. Okay, we've got, again, still in the lily family. And lilies are very simple plants. Oftentimes you don't have stems, you just have a flower stem and a couple leaves, and that's about it. With yellow trout lily, I've got a colony of those growing not far from my house. And in this particular one, the anthers are yellow. And I have seen yellow trout lilies where the anthers are maroon, which just kind of accents the maroon freckles that you see here on the petals. Now, these aren't petals; these are the tepals. Okay, so these are fused petals and sepals together are called tepals. So in the case of the trout lilies, they're tepals. Notice they recurve backwards and to show the anthers. And then right in the middle of the anther, you have this long stem, that's the style. And at the end of the style is this knob, and that's the stigma. Okay, white trout lily. Again, simple, just a couple leaves, flowering stalk, and the flower. Now this plant is pretty small. It's about 4-5 inches tall. And when I was taking this photograph, I was laying on my belly. And if you notice, the wood's kind of wet here, so I got nice and muddy. But hey, you gotta get the picture, right? I came back to this plant or plants in this area multiple times because the petals or the tepals were not recurved backwards, because I wanted to get that shot. I think it was just because the days were cloudy and they just didn't want to show off their anthers. But one day it was bright, and I got the money shot on that one. So beautiful little plants. Wild hyacinth. All right, so another lily. Again, tepals, 6 of them. They're white or light blue to lavender in color, and you see these really bright yellow anthers. And we have the end of the style here, the ovule is noticed, kind of a green blob or bulbous area. The leaves of wild hyacinth resemble grass. So we have a eastern slope in the park, in the woods, and it's just covered with, it just looks like grass. If I'm not sure what it is, it just looks like a grass. Very thin leaves, parallel veins, but it is the leaves of wild hyacinth. So here in a week or so, that whole bank will just be covered with these beautiful flowers. Okay, wild leeks, left side of the screen. You won't see a showy flower from this. In fact, the flowers don't come up until later. Very inconspicuous. But if you're walking in the woods now, you'll see these leaves, and they kind of resemble daffodil leaves. So you're kind of like, where's the pretty flower? Well, this is wild leeks, and they're prized for people that like to walk in the spring and find these because they taste like wild onions. So the bulbs look just like wild onions. They taste like it. Now we want to be sustainable here, and not dig up these plants. But you can just pinch off the lower stems and use that, cut that up into your salad. It tastes just like wild onions. So wild leeks are prized for their edible stems and bulbs. Okay, the buttercup family. All right, we've got a few members of the buttercup family that are spring ephemerals. The one here on the left is hepatica, and early in the spring you'll see all these flowering stems, and at the end of the flower, these are actually the sepals this time. So we have multiple sepals that resemble petals, and then you see the green stigma there in the center. Now, if you look at the bottom here near the letter B, you'll see this kind of a old leathery looking leaf, and that was last year's leaf. You won't see this year's leaves until after the flower blooms. So once they're done blooming, then the new leaves will come out and try to capture as much sunlight as possible before the forest floor is shaded. Okay, we've got rue anemone, which is a very dainty little flower, pretty white petals surrounding all these little yellow anthers. And it's also called windflower because it blows very lightly, or it moves very lightly in a light breeze, and which really frustrates photographers because it just won't sit still even on a calm day. But really cool little plant. If you have these in your woods, you have a good quality woods because they just don't grow everywhere. So rue anemone. The mustard family. Okay, we have purple crests. The flowers kind of droop down, or they can be upright. But the one thing about mustards is that they have 4 petals. So all members of the mustard families have 4 petals. So if you're in the woods now and you see a flower with 4 petals, it's likely that it's from the mustard family. Now, purple crests, the petals themselves, not often, they're not really purple. They're kind of light pink in color. Now, we do have a spring crest, which has mostly white petals. But these grow in colonies. You'll see these, you won't see just one individual plant. You'll actually see several plants in that area. Cutleaf toothwort. All right. Another unique plant. The leaves are actually in a whorled arrangement. So at the node, you'll have 3 different leaves emerging from the same area. So we call that a whorled arrangement. The leaves themselves are deeply cut. You see these serrated leaf edges here. And so that's where it gets its name, cutleaf toothwort. The petals, now this particular flower here, I think one of the petals is hidden from the other one, but there are 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 petals. Cool little plant. This is a very, very popular in the woods at the park where I work. And it's just a joy to see them. They'll be out soon. Okay, we have a couple bad guys in the mustard family. Dame's rocket, probably escaped from gardens, who knows, way back when. Actually, a very showy plant. It's got deep pink or violet colored petals, but they're 4, right? It's in the mustard family. So it can be invasive. I know we had some growing up. I have a small woods in our backyard. Actually, it's in the neighbor's woods. And there's a little clump of Dame's rocket. My wife got all excited. She goes, "Oh, it's such a beautiful plant." And I said, it's invasive. She goes, "Well, you're not going to kill it, are you?" I said, "Well, we'll see." It hasn't come back this year, so maybe something ate it. But the big problem we have, though, is this guy right here, garlic mustard. Both of these are biennials, by the way. So the first year is just a rosette of basal leaves, goes through a cold period. The next year it sends up a flowering stalk and flower. So little white petals, 4 petals. And but it is a prolific seeder, as some of you know, so it just can just overrun the understory in a woods. I want to show you this picture. This is kind of a cool picture. So if you look at the flower here, you count more than 4 petals. So this is not a mustard. This is not garlic mustard. But if you look, here's the leaf right here of this flower. This is actually bloodroot. So these 2 plants, these are 2 bloodroots. But the leaves around the bloodroot is what? Garlic mustard. And this is why we don't like this plant, because it chokes out our native wildflowers in our woods. So the best method I found for garlic mustard is just to pull them. I know we have lots of volunteers that come into the park, and we have volunteer days where we just pull hundreds and hundreds of garlic mustard plants. This is the problem, that it chokes out our native wildflowers. Okay, the mint family. On the left, we have downy wood mint. The mints are characteristic by having square stems, opposite leaves. Okay, it means you have 2 leaves per node, and a flower that has 2 lips. Okay, it's got a lower lip and an upper lip. So here's kind of a closer view of that. So the lower lip is speckled. Okay, so what are we doing here? What's this plant trying to do? Well, it's trying to attract pollinators. This is a good landing spot right here. And as it lands on this lower lip, here's the upper lip. And as it's feeding on some nectar, he doesn't know it, but his back is being covered with pollen. So this is the filament, and the anthers are right here. Okay, as I'm pointing that with my pointer. So the insects go in, they land here, they see that, good landing spot, and as they're feeding, they're getting pollen dusted onto their back. And then they fly to another flower, and that's how they pollinate the flower. Okay, purple dead nettle. Sometimes we can see this in the woods as well. Right now, we see it quite a bit out in large fields, no-till fields, just covered with purple dead nettle or henbit. They're both in the mint family. More weedy, really. Introduced plants, but they've got two lips as well. Here's the bottom lip and the upper lip of this particular mint. Again, square stems, opposite leaves, and this one's called purple dead nettle. Okay, I call this the odds and ends family. Just single plants from different families here. The first one is bloodroot. It's from the poppy family, and big, beautiful white petals surrounded by yellow or surrounding yellow anthers, very conspicuous. And the leaves come out first, and then it looks like the flower just grows right through the leaf, but actually the leaves are just kind of curled around the flowering stalk. The stems and the underground rhizomes contain a orange reddish sap, and that's where it gets its name, bloodroot. After the bloodroot flowers, the leaves will open up, and they'll be about as big as your hand. And they're trying to capture as much sunlight as possible before they're shaded out. So in a week or so, all these flowers will be gone, but you'll see the leaves, as you're walking around through the forest. All right, we have Dutchman's breeches. Okay, same family from the bleeding hearts, the ornamental bleeding hearts that we can buy in the garden centers. But this is the wild native Dutchman's breeches. I love the foliage here. Just with a light breeze, you'll see the foliage kind of bounce around. But what's real showy is this upside down flower called Dutchman's breeches. So it looks like the guy is kind of like hanging from his, from the stem upside down. If I do this and turn him upside, then you can see here's his head and his arms and his legs. So it looks like his breeches here, right? Dutchman's breeches. The other flower that we have on the right is pepper and salt, or harbinger of spring. Very dainty little plant. I mean, we're only talking 2-3 inches, 4 inches at the most. Just gets above the leaf litter, then it produces these dainty little flowers, bright white petals surrounding these dark maroon, almost black colored anthers. Gives you that salt and pepper look. This particular plant is, again, as I mentioned, is in the carrot family. Same family that giant hogweed is from, and it's 12 feet tall. So they're obviously much different looking, but they're from the same botanical family. When I took this picture, it was 35 degrees that day, and I had my insulated coveralls and out here trying to take some pictures. And what was interesting was there was 1 or 2 honeybees on every flower, and there was multiple flowers of these out at that time. So even in that cold weather and early in the spring or late winter, we had bees out there foraging. Spring beauty, okay, iconic spring beauty. This is in the purslane family. Yep, that's right, the same family that the weed that we find in our garden. So, but this is the pretty cousin. The petals have these pink veins that kind of accent these pink anthers. Just a beautiful plant. We have some of these growing now in our woods. First, you see the long, narrow leaves, almost kind of look like a wide grass leaf. But soon you'll have the cluster of flowers come out, spring beauty. Over here on the right, we've got shooting star. This is from the primrose family. Now, this particular one has white petals, but we can also see it in pink. And shooting star can grow in the woods or in the prairie. There's also, I've seen shooting stars grow just, in the prairie without any trees around it at all. The petals, as you can see, obviously point backwards or up to show or expose the fused anthers. And then you can see this little stick protruding out the base, and that is the style, and then the stigma is on the end of that. It's called shooting star, but to me it almost looks like a badminton birdie, a shuttlecock. All right, May apples. Okay, when they first come up, the leaves are kind of a glossy color, and then as the leaves mature, they lose that glossiness, and it grows in colonies like this, and almost like an umbrella shaped leaf. As it started raining really hard, you could almost like hide underneath this and not even get wet. But the flowers are developed in the axils of the two leaves. And the flowers, okay, if you can see it here in the picture, right here it is in the axils of the two leaves. So it's a pretty simple plant. You have a central stalk and then a couple of leaves, and then right in the middle there, in the axil, is where the flower is. Big flower, big white petals surrounding these large anthers, and then this knob here is the stigma. Okay, Virginia bluebells, one of my favorites. They start off, this is in the borage family. They start off with these pink buds, and then those buds later turn into these beautiful trumpet-shaped powder blue flowers. Now, phenology, that's a term that means seasonal events. The phenology this year has been a little different than in past years, at least in our woods. The bluebells came out first this year for some reason, and then the bloodroots came second, and so on. So usually the bluebells kind of follow hepatica and bloodroot and some of those others, but in our woods they came out first this year for some reason, and they didn't get very tall. They were like 2 or 3 inches tall before they started putting on their flowers. I think that warm period we had 1st of March might have probably initiated a lot of that, and then we had that cold period, and it just kind of slowed everything down, and maybe it just put things out of order. I don't know, but that's what we discovered or saw this year. Okay, wild geranium, another beautiful flower. Now we're kind of getting later into spring. A lot of the other spring ephemerals are now already flowered and set seed, and so now we have kind of like a next wave of flowers coming. Wild geranium, it's got 5 big petals, kind of a light pink, the lavender color, and you can see these conspicuous anthers here in the middle of the flower. These grow in colonies. You'll see, again, you won't see just 1 or 2 plants. You'll see many plants growing in an area. Wood poppy is from the poppy family, and the leaves are hairy underneath, as you can see in the photo here, and great big showy flowers. You can see the big yellow petals surrounding all these yellow anthers, and in the middle there is this green knob, and that's the stigma. The leaves and stems produce a yellow sap too. Okay, woodland phlox. There are many phloxes. There's garden phlox, and there's even a prairie phlox. This is woodland phlox, so it grows in the woods, and it has flowers that look like this. Now, these looks like we have 5 petals here, but this is actually one big petal that has 5 lobes. Okay, so it's called a corolla. So it's a 5-parted corolla. So technically these aren't petals, but it's a 5-parted corolla. Okay, deeply lobed. Now the colors can change. It can be blue, light blue, white. Kind of depends on the environment and where it's growing. The next is the violets. We have Confederate violet. We've got variegated colors here of yellow, white, purple, and all of them have these defined kind of a violet or purple colored veins that kind of are nectar guides that kind of draws insects into the flower. So very, very beautiful little violets. We also have woolly blue violet and another one called common yellow violet. Again, you can see these maroon colored veins that are called nectar guides that guide the insects into the flower. So the violets. All right, wild ginger, very unique plant. It's a really good ground cover. If you can buy this and use it as a natural ground cover instead of some of the other ground covers that are more invasive or introduced, this is a native ground cover. Pretty simple plant. It's got heart-shaped leaves and a petiole, and that's it. There's no stems. The stems are underground. It has rhizomes. You can see the petioles are just covered with dense, soft hairs. It almost feels like a puppy, just so hairy, nice and hairy. Now the flowers you can see are right here at the base of the plant, right in the axils of those 2 petioles. You will have this 3-parted flower that has this hairy bulbous calyx here, and very unique plant, but very cool. When I'm taking people on hikes, guided hikes, I will stop in front of or over the wild ginger, and I'll ask people to look for the flower. I don't see a flower, and then I have to pull the leaves back to see the flowers on the ground. So unique in that the flowers are on the ground instead of above the plant. Okay, squaw root or bear corn. First thing you notice about this plant is that it's lacking green. It's not green. This is a non-photosynthetic parasitic plant. It doesn't produce or it doesn't photosynthesize. It gets its nutrients from its host. So it's a parasite, and the host is an oak tree. So it gets its nutrients from the roots of an oak tree. And so it kind of resembles, it looks like pine cones. Now you can see the leaves over here are kind of young yet, and then over here they're starting to get some age and they're starting to turn brown. If you see these poking out of the ground, I would look up because you're probably standing under an oak tree. So very unique plant here. It's a parasitic plant, non-photosynthesizing plant. All right, fire pink. Probably the only bright red colored plant that we see growing in the woods. It's in the pink family. Also, another name for the pink family, or one of the members, is catchfly. And the reason they call it catchfly is because this plant is covered with sticky hairs. Not so much the petals, but the stems, the calyx. This is the part that kind of hides the flower, this bulbous calyx. The leaves, the stems, all covered in little sticky hairs, and it catches flies. And sometimes, if you're a good observer, you might find a little spider kind of hiding out and waiting for a fly to get caught on the leaves or stems. Now you notice that the petals have a notch, and that's significant because there's another red colored flower from the pink family, and that's called royal catchfly. Now, royal catchfly does not have a notch, but it also blooms much later. So it's not going to bloom the same time as fire pink. And typically, royal catchfly blooms more in the prairie setting. It can take some shade, but it prefers wide open prairies. So 2 members of the pink family look very much alike, but the difference is in the notch at the tip of the petal. Coral catchfly doesn't have the notch, fire pink does. Okay, water leaf. Okay, great water leaf. There's a number of different water leaves. A lot of them have these great big leaves that look like maple or oak leaves, kind of a light blue to lavender colored flowers. And you can see the dark black anthers here, kind of accenting the flower. Now, there's a way that you can identify between the water leaves, and you need your magnifying glass for this. If you look where my cursor is, I'm pointing at the end of the style. I'm going to blow this up so you can see it a little better. I got some arrows here. At the end of the style, the stigma is parted. Okay, it's kind of split in the middle here. If it's split near the top, as shown here, then you have great water leaf. If it's split down towards the base of the flower or base of the style, then you've got a different water leaf. So sometimes you got to take your magnifying glass with you in order to correctly identify some of these flowers. So that's the water leaf family. Okay, one of my favorites, and it's not because it has a beautiful flower, it's just got this really odd fruit. And this is called doll's eyes. It's in the buttercup family. And imagine walking into the woods and seeing these plants. This is really cool. These berries are white with a black dot at the end that resembles doll's eyes. Now the flower looks like that, which is fairly inconspicuous. It blooms in May and June, but what's really interesting, I think, is the fruit. So this is called doll's eyes, and some of your high quality woods may support this particular plant. Another unique plant, again, it's not really the flower that catches our attention, but it's the fruit. And this is called early horse gentian. It's from the honeysuckle family. And the flowers are in the axils of the leaves, and they produce a fruit that resembles a tomato. Looks like a little cherry tomato. This is what the flower looks like. And if you're not careful, you will miss them because they are very inconspicuous, maroon colored, very small. And you can see protruding out of the petals there is the style, and then the knobby stigma there at the end. So early horse gentian and doll's eye. So again, we're not looking at the flowers, but it's the fruit that's really conspicuous. Okay, as we're wrapping up here, I'll talk about a couple of very rare plants in Indiana. A lot of you know this, that Indiana has more orchid species than Hawaii does. I think there's about 40 different orchid species in Indiana. These are just 2 here, but very rare. You're not always going to find these on your walk through the woods. But for those of you that do know where some of these are, I'm sure you're going to try to keep it a secret because we don't want anybody to poach them and try to dig them up and plant them in their yard, because it just won't work. But so this is one on the left is called large yellow lady's slippers. It has 3 petals and 3 sepals. If you look at this one here, here's a couple of the 3 sepals, and the 3rd petal is modified into this moccasin or slipper shaped petal. And then the insects, the pollinators, can get into that petal through this hole right here. So 3 sepals, 3 petals, but the 3rd petal is modified into this moccasin or slipper. Okay, the one on the right is orange fringed orchid, and the flowers, petals have a fringed look to them. Very unique plant. This blooms in July. Imagine walking into the woods in July. It's dark, it's green. That's about all you see, and then suddenly you see these orange masses of flowers that just obviously grabs your attention. But very rare plant. It is considered rare or protected or threatened, I guess, in the counties in which it is found. But very cool that we have these types of plants in our woods. Now, that's the end of our wildflower hike. I hope you all didn't get lost, stayed on the trail. I want to talk about a few threats to our wildflowers. Some of the things that why we don't have wildflowers is because of this. And the first one here is our enemy, the bush honeysuckle, which I've been working on just today, in fact. As you can see, it takes over the understory, it crowds out everything, it shades everything. The berries, it produces berries, but they're not good for wildlife food. So it's something we really have to get rid of in order for the wildflowers to come back. I have a little section of woods in my backyard, and I've been working on honeysuckle, and now I'm starting to see spring beauties, bluebells, other things that are starting to work its way in. So it does work if you get rid of them. And I can tell you how to get rid of them, but that's a whole different time or presentation. I work with many woody invasives and using different methods to control them. Another threat, as we already talked about, is garlic mustard. Again, it can just take over understory, prolific cedar, and so we want to pull these plants before it sets seed. And so about the time it starts to flower is a good time to start yanking it out of the ground. It pulls up pretty easily, but don't pull it up and leave it, because it can, some of the seed could still be viable, so remove it from the woods. And then deer. I mentioned I do have some wildflowers I'm trying to get established, and but we do have deer. I've got a little trail camera in the back, and just about every other night we'll have 4 or 5 deer show up on that trail camera. So they're doing a good job of eating anything that they can find green, and oftentimes it's wildflowers. So I know the DNR every year we have hunts, harvest deer in our state parks. We do here at Prophetstown State Park. The deer numbers have actually decreased a bit over the years, so I guess that's good. We're not getting as many as we used to, but they are still can be a menace in a lot of our wildflower areas. Okay, we got a quick quiz here as we wrap up. Hopefully you were paying attention. So what are the Trillium's 3 sets of 3? Remember what those were? I'll give you a couple seconds here. All right, time's up. There's leaves, sepals, and petals. Those were the 3 sets of 3. And remember, the drooping trillium had another set of 3, and that was the 3-parted steeple, or stigma, excuse me. Okay, mustards have how many petals per flower? The answer, 4. Number 3, wild leeks are prized for their edible stems and bulbs. And again, just eat the stems, don't dig up the bulbs. And number 4, the sticky tip of the style is called the what? Starts with an S, T, the stigma. All right, just a quick commercial. I do have a couple of books. All the pictures that you saw here tonight are from my Into the Woods book. It's $15. You can just go to my website. I'll show what that is here in a second. Proceeds from the sale of the book goes to help support Niches programs. Niches is a land trust nonprofit organization that takes care of hundreds of acres of woodlands and prairies in west central Indiana. And then my newest book, the latest book, is called A Prairie View. prairie wildflowers and grasses. All of these again are local. It's all, you know, from the 4 or 5 county area where I took these photographs. There's my website, wildflowerbooksbydan.com, all one word. Or you can take a picture of this QR code. Okay, got some time for some questions, Liz?
Yes. Thank you so much, Dan. That was fascinating. And I was very impressed with the pictures. Seeing those up close and hearing a better description of what the identifying features are is really helpful. So I do appreciate that. If anybody has any questions, we already have a few in the chat, but if you'd like to add some questions, we'll go ahead and take those for a few minutes. I will be sending out an email. We did record this presentation. It'll take me some time to get it edited and closed caption. I'll send out an email with the link to his books as well as the information on that recording. And so let's see what we've got here. Tom said, I see these wild leeks often, but I don't smell the oniony smell right now. I've been wondering. I know conservation here is important. Are there lookalikes?
Good question. Trying to think when, yeah, the ones that I've picked here recently do still have that oniony smell. I'm trying to think if there's any lookalikes. Not really, because they, you know, they kind of grow in patches. And so if you see just individual plants, then it may be something else entirely different. But yeah, the leeks will grow in a patch. So I don't know if anybody on the call tonight knows if there is why you're not smelling the oniony smell or not.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, this is Tom. Sorry, Dan. I'd say the patches, but perhaps it's my sniffer too. So
That could be possible for sure.
May want to bring someone along with you to sniff for you. There you go.
Good idea.
Diane asked, "Are spring beauties edible like purslane?" And a couple people answered her that yes, they were.
You know, that's a good question. I don't do a lot of eating of wildflowers. Maybe I should start doing that. But I get that question a lot. Is, you know, can I eat this? Is it something good for medicinal use? That's just, you know, one part of it I just don't know a whole lot about. That information is not even in my books. I don't offer that. So you'll have to go to another reference about that. But it's good to know that somebody has tried it and they lived and didn't die. And but I do know that the purslane that grows in your garden, the weed, that people do eat that. That is edible. Yeah.
That purslane is great. And the spring beauties, actually, it probably isn't worth the time. They're very, very small tubers, but both the tuber and the flower are edible. And I don't say that recklessly.
Okay.
Thank you, Tom. Kat asked, "Does bear corn prefer white oak over red oak, or does it care?"
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. Where I have seen it was under white oak.
Same.
Okay.
Tom and Julie say they're seeing garlic mustard flowering now at only an inch high.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to my phenology description with the bluebells. They started, you know, they started their growth in that early March period when it was warm, and then they kind of shut down or slowed down when we got into that cold period. And, you know, plants, what do they do? What's their main purpose? Is to set seed. So they may have been triggered to thinking that, you know, we've got some bad weather here. I've got to produce a flower quickly. Who knows what has caused this? But I've noticed a lot of flowers are shorter this year, or the spring ephemerals in particular. But yes, and I have noticed that that wild garlic is, or garlic mustard is blooming now too.
Quite early. Kat noted that pulling garlic mustard is a great service project for Cub Scout groups. Their gentle pulls take out the root better than an adult tug.
Well, I'm 6'3", so I can't bend over very far. So I like for them to get really tall before I start pulling them. I know some people like to pull them when they're still in the rosette stage. Well, good, good for you, but I can't bend over that far.
Tamara said, do any of our woodland wildflowers form symbiotic relationships with trees?
Oh, I don't know. Of course, the squaw root is parasitic, so it has a relationship with the tree. I don't know if the tree is benefiting from it, but no, I don't know. That's a good question.
And Judy said she did a Google search and American false hellebore is a lookalike, but not edible. I suspect she's talking about a lookalike for that wild leek we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, those leaves of that plant is whiter, than the wild leeks. So yeah, that leaf is I would say an inch or two wider than the wild leeks. But I know what you're talking about. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think you noted also they have a little bit of similarity to a daylily as well.
Yeah.
And those tend to be have naturalized from old farm
Right.
plots and things like that. So you'll find lilies in odd places for sure.
Yeah.
Well, that is the end of our questions, and we are about at our time. So I want to thank you again, Dan, for coming on and sharing your expertise with us. Very fascinating and good to see that. And it's a great timing too, because a lot of these are out or about out, and it's a good chance to get out. If you'll check out our IFWA website, we have forestry and wildlife events on there, and we do have a few wildflower walks listed right now. So it might be a chance for you to get out and try them for yourself. I'll send an email tomorrow with the links to that, as well as the links to Dan's books. And we appreciate you joining us tonight. Thank you very much for attending and participating. And thanks again, Dan.
Thanks for having me.
Sure.